Maya Johnson pushed the glass door of the upscale car dealership, the soft chimes signaling her entrance. The bright, spacious showroom was lined with gleaming luxury vehicles, their sleek curves a testament to design perfection. A faint scent of leather and fresh polish filled the air. Maya paused at the entrance, scanning the space with quiet curiosity. Her jeans were simple but well-fitted, paired with a plain black sweater and sneakers. She had tied her natural curls into a low bun, exuding a subtle confidence. A receptionist glanced up from her desk, her professional smile faltering ever so slightly as her gaze took in Maya's casual attire. Maya caught the hesitation in the woman's eyes but chose to ignore it, walking further into the showroom. "Good afternoon," Maya greeted, her voice even, as she approached a nearby desk where a young man sat. The nameplate read Ethan Williams. Ethan, in his early 20s, fidgeted with his tie and hesitated for a moment before offering her a small, unsure smile. "Afternoon, ma'am. How can I help you today?" he asked, his tone polite but tinged with hesitation. "I'm interested in one of your models, the Vodome 750, Maya said, referring to the brand's flagship luxury car. Ethan blinked, the name of the exclusive model clearly catching him off guard. The Vodome 750 was one of the dealership's crown jewels, starting at nearly $400,000. He glanced at her outfit, his smile faltering. Sure. Let me see if someone can assist you with that." Before Maya could respond, another voice cut in, loud and confident. "Ethan, no need to trouble yourself." Mark Hammond, the dealership's top salesman, strode over, his sharp suit and gelled-back hair exuding self-assurance. His polished shoes clicked against a tile floor, and his cologne lingered in the air as he approached. Mark's hazel eyes scanned Maya, and his expression barely hid his disdain. "I'll handle this," Mark said, clapping a hand on Ethan's shoulder. He turned to Maya, plastering on a tight-lipped smile. "Good afternoon. I'm Mark, senior sales consultant here. How can I assist you?" Maya regarded him calmly. "I'm interested in purchasing a Vodome 750. I'd like to see one up close, perhaps take it for a test drive." Mark blinked, and his smile turned sharp, almost predatory. "The Vodome 750? He echoed, his tone dripping with skepticism. "Yes," Maya replied simply, her composure unwavering. Mark chuckled under his breath, shaking his head as if she had just told a joke. "I see. Well, that's quite the car. Are you sure you don't mean one of our base models? Perhaps something more affordable?" Ethan's eyes darted nervously between Maya and Mark, his discomfort palpable. "I know what I want," Maya said, her tone calm but firm. Mark tilted his head, his condescension growing more apparent. "I'm sure you do, ma'am, but the Vodome 750 is a very exclusive vehicle. It's a six-figure investment, not something you can just take out on a whim." Maya's jaw tightened ever so slightly, but her expression remained composed. "I'm aware of the price, Mr. Hammond. I'd like to see it." Mark crossed his arms, leaning slightly toward her as if to emphasize his authority. "Look, I don't mean to offend, but we usually don't offer test drives on that model unless the customer provides proof of, well, serious intent to purchase." "Serious intent," Maya repeated, arching an eyebrow. Mark nodded, clearly enjoying the power he believed he held in the situation. "Yes, ma'am. You understand, of course. It's policy. A car like that, well, it's not exactly for everyone." Ethan coughed awkwardly, as if trying to diffuse the tension, but Mark shot him a warning glance that kept him silent. Maya tilted her head slightly, her gaze piercing as she studied Mark. "I see. And what exactly qualifies as serious intent, Mr. Hammond?" Mark smirked, gesturing vaguely. "Well, a credit check, a down payment, something to show that you're not just wasting our time. You'd be surprised how many people come in here just to browse without the means to actually follow through." Maya's lips curved into the faintest of smiles, though there was no warmth in it. "Interesting policy." Mark shrugged. "It's just business, ma'am. You understand." "I do," Maya said, her tone steady. "I'll ask you one last time. May I see the Vodome 750? Mark's smile faltered slightly under her unwavering gaze, but He quickly regained his composure. "I'm afraid I can't do that, ma'am. I don't want to waste your time, or ours." The room seemed to grow quieter, the tension between them thickening. Ethan shifted uncomfortably, his face flushed with embarrassment for the way his colleague was treating a customer. "Very well," Maya said after a pause, her tone calm but firm. She glanced at Ethan, her expression softening slightly. "Thank you for your time." She turned and began walking toward the exit, her strides measured and confident. Mark let out a low chuckle as he watched her go. "Unbelievable," he muttered under his breath, shaking his head. Ethan hesitated, glancing after Maya before turning to Mark. "That was harsh," he said cautiously. Mark scoffed. "Oh, please. She wasn't serious. You think someone dressed like that can afford a Vodome 750? I did her a favor by not wasting her time. People like her come in here all the time, trying to act like they belong." Ethan frowned but didn't reply, his discomfort clear. Outside the dealership, Maya paused on the sidewalk, taking a deep breath. Her heart was steady, her expression calm, but a flicker of disappointment crossed her face. She wasn't surprised by what had happened. After all, it wasn't the first time she had been judged by her appearance. But that didn't make it any less infuriating. Pulling out her phone, she made a quick call. "Clara, it's me," she said when the line connected. "I need you to schedule a meeting with Sterling Motors tomorrow morning. Yes, in person. And make sure Charles is there." She ended the call and slipped her phone back into her pocket, her eyes glinting with quiet determination. The humiliation she had endured wouldn't go unanswered. Tomorrow, they would see who Maya Johnson truly was. The next morning, the showroom at Sterling Motors buzzed with its usual rhythm. Salesmen shuffled papers, adjusted their ties, and exchanged small talk, all while keeping an eye on the door for the day's first big-ticket customer. Mark Hammond was especially chipper, having just closed a lucrative deal the previous evening. He leaned casually against a desk, recounting the story to his colleagues with his signature air of arrogance. "And just like that, they signed the papers," Mark said, snapping his fingers for emphasis. "That's how you close a sale. A confidence charm, and a good read on who can afford what." He smirked, glancing at Ethan, who was organizing a stack of brochures nearby. Ethan remained quiet, clearly still troubled by the events of the previous day. He had replayed the incident with Maya in his head multiple times, wishing he'd had the courage to speak up. But Mark's domineering presence always made it difficult. Just as Mark launched into another boastful story, the showroom's glass doors swung open. The chime was the same as always, but this time it seemed to carry a weight that silenced the room. Heads turned in unison as Maya Johnson entered, her steps deliberate and poised. But this was not the same Maya who had walked in the day before. She wore a tailored black pantsuit that hugged her frame with effortless elegance, the sharp lines of the jacket emphasizing her commanding presence. Her natural curls cascaded over her shoulders, and the faintest hint of makeup accentuated her striking features. A pair of sleek black heels clicked against the tiled floor as she strode inside, flanked by two individuals who immediately commanded attention. To her left was Clara, her personal assistant, dressed in a professional blouse and pencil skirt, her hands clutching a leather-bound folder. To her right stood Charles Bennett, a distinguished man in his 60s with salt and pepper hair and a tailored suit that screamed authority. He carried himself with an air of importance, and anyone who had even a passing knowledge of the automotive industry would recognize him as the regional director for the luxury car brand. The hum of activity in the showroom came to an abrupt halt. Salesmen froze mid-conversation, their gazes shifting between the trio as they approached. Mark's smirk vanished the moment he recognized Maya. He straightened, adjusting his tie nervously as his mind scrambled to process the stark contrast between the woman standing before him and the casual shopper he had dismissed the day before. "And Miss Johnson," Mark stammered, his tone uncharacteristically polite. "Good morning. Welcome back to Sterling Motors. How can we assist you today?" Maya stopped in front of him, her expression calm, but her eyes cold. "Good morning," she replied evenly. "I believe we spoke yesterday." Mark's face flushed, a bead of sweat forming on his brow. "Ah, yes. I do remember. I hope there were no hard feelings about. I'm not here for pleasantries, Mr. Hammond, Maya interrupted, her voice steady but firm. I'm here to address a problem. Mark's mouth opened, but no words came out. The entire showroom seemed to hold its breath as Maya turned to Charles. Mr. Bennett, she said, her tone softening slightly as she addressed the regional director. Thank you for taking the time to meet me here this morning. Of course, Miss Johnson, Charles replied, his deep voice resonating with authority. He turned to the now pale Mark and the other sales staff. I trust we'll have everyone's full attention. Maya's gaze swept over the room, her expression unreadable. I came to this dealership yesterday with the intent of purchasing a Vodome 750, she began, her voice carrying effortlessly across the space. Instead, I was met with condescension, judgment, and outright prejudice. A murmur rippled through the staff, but no one dared to interrupt. Mark looked as though he wished the ground would swallow him whole. I was told, in no uncertain terms, that I didn't belong here, Maya continued, her tone never rising but cutting through the silence like a blade. That I was wasting your time. Ethan shifted uncomfortably, his guilt from the day before bubbling to the surface. Maya turned her attention back to Mark, who was visibly trembling under her gaze. Tell me, Mr. Hammond, she said, her tone laced with quiet authority. What, exactly, made you decide that I wasn't a serious customer? Mark stuttered, his words fumbling. I didn't mean. It was just a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding, Maya repeated, her voice icy. Interesting choice of words. Would you have made the same assumptions if I had walked in wearing a designer suit yesterday? Or if my skin were a different colors? Mark's face turned crimson, and his colleagues shifted awkwardly, avoiding eye contact with him. Maya let the question hang in the air for a moment before continuing. Prejudice, Mr. Hammond, is not only harmful, it's bad for business. I've seen it destroy reputations, and I've seen companies fall because of it. Charles stepped forward, his expression grim. Let me make one thing clear, he said, addressing the room. Miss Johnson is not just any customer. She is one of this company's largest private investors. Her contributions saved this brand from bankruptcy during the last recession. Without her, none of us would be standing here today. The weight of his words sent a shockwave through the room. Mark's eyes widened in disbelief, and Ethan's jaw dropped slightly. The other sales staff exchanged nervous glances, suddenly realizing the gravity of the situation. I wasn't going to reveal that, Maya said, her tone calm but firm, because I don't believe my wealth or my status should determine the level of respect I receive. But yesterday, you forced my hand. She turned to Charles. I trust you'll take the necessary steps to ensure this doesn't happen again. Absolutely, Miss Johnson, Charles said, his voice resolute. He turned to the staff, his expression hardening. There will be a full review of this team's practices. And rest assured, disciplinary actions will be taken where necessary. Maya's gaze returned to Mark, who now looked utterly defeated. You had an opportunity yesterday, Mr. Hammond, she said. An opportunity to treat me with the same respect and dignity you would afford any other customer. You failed. And that failure reflects not just on you, but on this dealership as a whole. Mark opened his mouth to respond, but Maya held up a hand, silencing him. I don't want an apology, she said firmly. What I want is for you to learn from this. Because the next time you judge someone based on their appearance, you might not be lucky enough to have a second chance. Ethan, who had been silent until now, suddenly spoke up, his voice shaky but sincere. Miss Johnson, I just want to say I'm sorry. I should have spoken up yesterday. I knew it wasn't right, but Maya turned to him, her expression softening slightly. It takes courage to admit when you've fallen short, she said. I hope you'll find the courage to do more in the future. Ethan nodded, his face a mix of relief and resolve. Maya turned to Clara, who handed her a pen and a folder. With a few swift signatures, she finalized the purchase of the Vodome 750. But before handing the paperwork back, she paused. Who receives the commission for this sale? She asked, her tone neutral. Mark perked up slightly, clearly hoping to salvage some dignity. Ethan does, Maya said firmly. Mark's face fell, and Ethan's eyes widened in disbelief. You demonstrated empathy, even if it was hesitant, Maya said to Ethan. That matters. Ethan stammered. Thank you, Miss Johnson. I won't forget this. Maya offered him a small, knowing smile before turning to Charles. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have other business to attend to. With that, she strode out of the dealership, leaving behind a stunned silence and a lesson no one in that room would forget. The following day, the fallout from Maya Johnson's visit rippled through Sterling Motors like a shockwave. By the time the dealership opened, every employee was acutely aware of what had transpired. The tension in the air was almost tangible, especially for Mark Hammond, who sat in the manager's office, his face pale as he waited for what he feared would be the end of his career. The dealership's manager, Richard Graves, was a man in his 50s with a stern demeanor and a reputation for being unforgiving when it came to mistakes that reflected poorly on the business. He sat across from Mark, a folder open on his desk. You realize the position you've put this dealership in, don't you, Mark? Richard asked, his tone measured but laced with barely concealed anger. Yes, sir, Mark muttered, staring at the floor. Richard leaned back in his chair, shaking his head. We had an investor, walk in here yesterday, and you treated her like she didn't belong. Do you have any idea how close we are to losing her trust entirely? Do you even care? Mark swallowed hard, his hands gripping the arms of his chair. It wasn't intentional, sir. I made an assumption. I didn't know who she was. And that's exactly the problem, Richard snapped. You assumed. You judged a potential customer based on her appearance, and now we're all paying the price for your ignorance. This isn't just about Miss Johnson. This is about the culture you're fostering on my sales floor. Before Mark could respond, the office door swung open, and Charles Bennett stepped inside. His expression was calm, but the intensity in his eyes made it clear he wasn't there to exchange pleasantries. Good morning, Richard. Mark, Charles said, his voice cool. He placed a folder on the desk and turned to Mark. I assume you've been made aware of the consequences of your actions? Mark nodded weakly. Good, Charles said. Because Miss Johnson has requested something specific in light of yesterday's events. Mark's head shot up, his eyes wide. She has... Charles nodded, his expression unreadable. Yes. She's requested a meeting with the entire sales team. She wants to address all of you personally. Mark felt his stomach drop. A meeting? With the entire team? He could already imagine the humiliation of being called out in front of his colleagues. When? Richard asked, glancing at Charles. Today, Charles replied. In 1 hour. Mark's throat went dry. 1 hour later, the sales team was gathered in the dealership's conference room. The air was thick with unease, and the usual chatter that accompanied team meetings was noticeably absent. Mark sat stiffly in his chair, his nerves frayed. Ethan sat a few seats away, his expression a mix of curiosity and apprehension. When the door opened and Maya entered, the room fell completely silent. Once again, she was dressed impeccably, her sharp suit commanding attention. Clara followed close behind, carrying a slim laptop, and Charles brought up the rear, his presence adding to the gravity of the moment. Maya walked to the front of the room, her movements deliberate. She took a moment to scan the faces of the employees before speaking. Good afternoon, she began, her tone calm but firm. I appreciate you all taking the time to meet with me today. No one responded, but every eye was fixed on her. I'm here because what happened 2 days ago wasn't just a misunderstanding or an isolated incident, Maya continued. It was a symptom of a larger issue, a culture of prejudice and judgment that has no place in a business like this. Mark shifted uncomfortably in his seat, avoiding her gaze. I didn't come here to lecture you, Maya said, her tone softening slightly. I came here to challenge you to do better. Not just for your customers, but for yourselves. Because the way you treat people, regardless of their appearance, background, or perceived status, says more about you than it does about them. She paused, letting her words sink in before continuing. Yesterday, I finalized the purchase of a Vodome 750, Maya said. A car I've wanted for years. But do you know why I chose to buy it from this dealership, even after the way I was treated? The room remained silent, the tension palpable. "Because I believe in second chances," Maya said. "I believe that people can learn from their mistakes and grow. But growth requires accountability." Her gaze landed squarely on Mark, who looked like he wanted to sink into his chair. "Mr. Hammond," she said, her voice steady, "do you understand why what you did was wrong?" Mark hesitated, his throat tightening. "Yes, ma'am," he finally managed to say. "Then tell me," Maya said, folding her arms. "What will you do differently moving forwards?" Mark glanced around the room, his colleagues watching him intently. He took a deep breath, forcing himself to meet Maya's gaze. I'll stop making assumptions about people," he said. "I'll treat every customer with the respect they deserve, no matter how they look or what I think they can afford." Maya nodded, her expression unreadable.
"Good. I hope you mean that."
"Because actions speak louder than words." She turned to the rest of the team. "And that goes for all of you. Every person who walks through those doors deserves to be treated with dignity. It's not just good business. It's basic decency." Ethan, who had been quiet until now, suddenly raised his hand. "Yes?" Maya said, her tone encouraging. Ethan cleared his throat, his voice tentative. I wanted to say thank you for giving me the opportunity to earn your trust, and for reminding all of us what really matters." A small smile tugged at Maya's lips. "Thank you, Ethan. Your willingness to learn and grow is what gives me hope." She turned back to the team, her expression softening. "This isn't about punishing anyone. It's about creating a culture where everyone feels valued, your customers, your colleagues, and yourselves. Because when you build that kind of culture, success will follow." The room was silent for a moment, the weight of her words sinking in. Then, one by one, the employees began to nod, a sense of unity and resolve spreading through the group. Maya stepped back, glancing at Charles. "I trust you'll follow up on this," she said. "Absolutely," Charles replied, his tone firm. Maya nodded, then turned to the team one last time. "Thank you for listening. I hope this is the start of something better for all of you." With that, she walked out of the room, leaving behind a team of individuals who were no longer just employees, but people determined to change. The sun hung low in the sky as Maya's Vodome 750 glided smoothly into her private garage later that evening. She stepped out of the car, her heels clicking softly against the polished concrete floor as the faint hum of the engine faded into silence. Clara was already waiting by the side door, her tablet tucked under one arm. "That went about as well as it could have," Clara said, offering Maya a small smile as she handed her a glass of sparkling water. "Better than I expected," Maya replied, taking a sip and setting the glass on a nearby counter. Her tone was calm, but her expression betrayed the weight of the day. Mark's reaction, the team's openness to listen. "I think we got through to them." Clara nodded, leaning against the counter. "You certainly left an impression." Charles said he's already scheduling a follow-up meeting to put new customer service protocols in place. Maya sighed, rubbing her temples.
"Good.
But it's going to take more than a meeting or two to fix the damage that kind of culture causes. It's not just about one salesman's attitude. It's about the environment that allowed it to go unchecked for so long." Clara hesitated for a moment before speaking. "If you don't mind me asking, why did you choose to go back to that dealership? You could have bought the Vodome anywhere. No one would have blamed you for walking away." Maya looked at Clara, her gaze steady but reflective. "Because walking away wouldn't have changed anything," she said. "They would have gone on thinking their behavior was acceptable, that they could treat people like that and get away with it. I needed them to see, to feel, the consequences of their actions." Clara nodded slowly, understanding. "You turned a bad situation into a teachable moment. Not many people would have done that." Maya gave a small, tired smile. "It's not about being noble. It's about knowing the kind of world I want to leave behind. And if I can push even one person to think differently, it's worth it." The sound of Maya's phone buzzing on the counter interrupted their conversation. She glanced at the screen, her eyebrows raising slightly at the name on the caller ID. "Charles," she said, picking up the phone. "What's the update?" Clara watched as Maya listened intently, her expression shifting from curiosity to quiet concern. I see, Maya said after a pause. Thank you for letting me know. I'll handle it. She ended the call and set the phone down, exhaling deeply. What happened? Clara asked, her tone cautious. Mark, Maya said, her voice tinged with disappointment. Apparently, he's been spreading rumors about what happened at the dealership, trying to paint me as some entitled billionaire who came in just to humiliate him. Clara's eyes widened. Seriously? After everything? Maya nodded. He's trying to save face, but he doesn't realize he's only digging himself a deeper hole. Clara frowned. Do you want me to contact Charles? Have him address it internally? Maya shook her head.
No.
This isn't something Charles can fix. Mark needs to learn that actions have consequences, real ones. Clara hesitated. What are you thinking? Maya's lips pressed into a thin line as she folded her arms. He's trying to play the victim.
Fine.
Let's give him a reason to rethink that strategy. The next morning, the atmosphere at Sterling Motors was tense once again. Word of Maya's meeting with the team had spread quickly, but so had Mark's whispered grumblings. His version of events painted Maya as cold and condescending, a woman who had used her wealth to bully her way into proving a point. Some of the younger employees, unsure of what to believe, gave him sympathetic nods as he recounted his side of the story. Ethan, however, wasn't buying it. Mark, Ethan said carefully, approaching his colleague during a lull in the day. Don't you think it's time to own up to what happened? Spreading rumors isn't going to make this go away. Mark scowled, turning to face Ethan. You don't get it, do you? People like her think they can walk into places like this and throw their weight around just because they have money. She humiliated me in front of everyone, and now I'm the bad guy. She didn't humiliate you, Ethan said firmly. You did that to yourself when you decided to judge her based on how she looked. And instead of apologizing, you're doubling down. Do you even hear yourself? Mark's jaw tightened, but before he could respond, the chime of the front door cut through the tension. Both men turned to see Maya entering the dealership once again. This time, however, she was alone. Mark's face went pale, and Ethan straightened, unsure of what was about to unfold. Maya approached the front desk, her expression unreadable. She nodded politely to the receptionist before turning her attention to Mark. Mr. Hammond, she said, her tone calm but carrying an unmistakable edge. I'd like to speak with you privately.
Now?
Mark swallowed hard, his usual bravado nowhere to be found. Oh, of course, he stammered, gesturing toward a nearby office. The two entered the room, and Maya closed the door behind her. Mark shifted nervously, avoiding her gaze as she took a seat across from him. Mark, Maya began, her voice steady. I know what you've been saying about me. Mark's eyes widened, but he quickly tried to compose himself. I don't know what you're talking about. Maya tilted her head slightly, her gaze unwavering. Don't insult my intelligence. You've been spreading rumors, trying to frame yourself as the victim in this situation. I'm not here to argue with you. I'm here to give you an opportunity to set things right. Mark blinked, caught off guard by her directness. Set things right, he echoed. Yes, Maya said. You can either take responsibility for your actions and work toward rebuilding the trust you've damaged, or you can continue down this path and face the consequences of your choices. The decision is yours. Mark hesitated, his mind racing. He wanted to defend himself, to argue that he wasn't entirely in the wrong. But the look in Maya's eyes told him she wasn't here for excuses. I didn't mean to disrespect you, Mark said finally, his voice low. I made a mistake. A big one. And I've been trying to deflect because, well, I didn't know how to deal with it. Maya studied him for a moment before nodding. Acknowledging your mistake is the first step. But it's not enough. You need to show that you're willing to change, not just for me, but for every customer who walks through those doors. Mark nodded slowly, the weight of her words sinking in. You're right. I'll do better. I hope so, Maya said, standing. Because if you don't, you won't just lose your job. You'll lose the respect of everyone around you. And that's a far greater loss. With that, she walked out of the office, leaving Mark to sit alone with his thoughts. As Maya exited the dealership, Ethan caught her eye and gave her a small, grateful nod. She returned it, a faint smile tugging at her lips. Sometimes, she thought, change begins with a single conversation. The days that followed marked a turning point for Sterling Motors. The dealership was no longer the same place Maya had walked into that fateful day. Change was in the air, though it came slowly, like a tide reshaping the shoreline one wave at a time. Maya hadn't returned to the dealership since her private conversation with Mark, but her presence lingered like an unspoken challenge. The staff began to carry themselves differently, as if they were now more aware of the eyes that could be watching and judging, not from above, but from within. Mark Hammond sat at his desk, staring at the screen of his computer. His usual arrogance had been replaced by something unfamiliar: humility. He had replayed his encounter with Maya over and over in his mind, her words echoing louder than his own thoughts. He had been wrong. He had known that from the moment she returned to the dealership, but now, for the first time, he felt the weight of that truth. It wasn't just about losing a sale or his reputation. It was about realizing how deeply ingrained his biases had been and how much damage they had caused. Mark closed his laptop, stood up, and walked across the showroom floor. Ethan, busy organizing brochures, looked up in surprise as Mark approached. "Ethan," Mark said, his voice softer than usual. "Yeah?" Ethan replied, hesitant. Mark rubbed the back of his neck, struggling to find the words. I just wanted to say I'm sorry for how I've treated you and for how I acted with Miss Johnson. I was wrong." Ethan blinked, stunned.
Oh.
Thanks, Mark. I appreciate that." Mark nodded, but before he could say more, the showroom door chimed. Both men turned to see Charles Bennett walking in, followed by a group of representatives from the corporate office. "Meeting in the conference room," Charles said, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. The team filed into the conference room, tension crackling in the air. Charles stood at the head of the table, his expression serious, but not unkind. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "it's no secret that the past week has been challenging. Miss Johnson's visit forced us to confront some uncomfortable truths about how we conduct business. And while those truths were hard to hear, they've given us an opportunity to grow." He paused, scanning the room. "Starting today, Sterling Motors will be implementing new customer service training for all employees. This training isn't optional, and it isn't just about selling cars. It's about learning how to treat every person who walks through our doors with respect, dignity, and fairness." Mark shifted uncomfortably in his seat, but he didn't protest. Charles continued. "We'll also be establishing an anonymous feedback system for customers and employees alike. If there's a problem, we want to hear about it, and we want to fix it." The room was silent, the weight of Charles's words settling over the group. "And finally," Charles said, his voice softening, "I'd like to read you something Miss Johnson sent to me this morning." He pulled out a piece of paper and began to read aloud. "Respect is the foundation of trust, and trust is the foundation of success. When we judge people based on their appearance, we lose the chance to see who they truly are, and we lose the chance to grow. Change isn't easy, but it's necessary. And it starts with each of us making the choice to be better." Every day, when he finished, the room was quiet. Some employees nodded in agreement. Others stared at the table, lost in thought. Charles folded the paper and looked around. "Miss Johnson believes in second chances. Let's not waste the one she's given us." 3 months later, the transformation was evident. Sterling Motors had become a model dealership, earning praise not just for its luxury cars, but for its commitment to treating customers with fairness and respect. Ethan had stepped into a more prominent role, his quiet confidence growing with each passing day. He was no longer hesitant to speak up, and his sales numbers had begun to climb steadily. Mark, too, had changed. The arrogance that once defined him had been replaced by humility and a newfound determination to improve. He still carried the weight of his mistakes, but he used it as a reminder to do better. Maya stood in her sprawling office, the city skyline stretching out behind her. She was reviewing reports on her tablet when Clara walked in. "Sterling Motors just sent over their quarterly numbers," Clara said, handing Maya a folder. They've had a 15% increase in customer satisfaction since the new protocols were implemented. Maya smiled, flipping through the folder. That's good to hear. They're making progress. They are, Clara agreed. And Mark sent you a letter. Maya raised an eyebrow, accepting the envelope. She opened it carefully and read the handwritten note inside. Miss Johnson, I wanted to thank you for not giving up on me or on us. I've learned more in the past 3 months than I have in my entire career, and it's because you held me accountable. I still have a lot of work to do, but I'm committed to earning the trust one lost. Thank you for giving me the chance to be better. Mark Hammond. Maya folded the letter, her smile softening. It seems he's learning, she said, placing the note in her desk drawer. Clara nodded. Your approach worked. You didn't just buy a car, you changed a culture. Maya turned to look out the window, her reflection blending with the city lights. It's not about the car, she said quietly. It's about showing people what's possible when we choose to lead with dignity instead of pride. That evening, Maya walked into her garage, the Vodome 750 gleaming under the soft overhead lights. She ran her hand along its smooth surface, the memory of her father flashing through her mind. One day, Maya, he had said, his voice filled with hope. We'll have something like this. Not because we need it, but because it'll remind us of how far we've come. Maya smiled softly, her father's words echoing in her heart. She didn't buy the car to prove a point. She bought it because it represented something more, a legacy of resilience, a reminder that dignity and determination could conquer even the deepest prejudices. As she slid into the driver's seat and started the engine, the low rumble felt like a heartbeat, steady, strong, and full of promise. And with that, she drove into the night, leaving behind not just a legacy, but a lesson. True power lies not in wealth or status, but in the courage to change the world, one person at a time.